Yeah, you were good enough.
All right, open up your books to page 45. Part 5.
Oh, I'm already there.
Nice.
Okay, he's fine.
First.
Oh,
This is one of my favorite units, or one of my favorite chapters. One of my favorite chapters of the book that we are using. Aside from the sciencey stuff, the Bible's pretty important. I guess I'll wait for Elliot and Zoe to return. What is that? Oh, water? Okay.
how could you not provide us with water?
Okay, I did.
Dehydration.
There's unlimited water, and it comes out of that fountain in the hallway.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I provided that personally.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start on the basics, and I think Zoe will figure out what we're doing when she gets back. Okay, so as you know, our Christian faith is grounded on the testimony of Jesus. Right. So everything, if your faith is just a fantastic building, we'll make it like the stinking Empire State Building or something. Just a wonderfully tall and strong building with a beacon on the top that just shines to the world. Wonderful, wonderful thing. It is built on the foundation of Jesus. And Jesus, thankfully, is an unshakable foundation. He is the rock. Jesus himself says, he who listens to my words and does them is like a wise man who builds his house on a rock. And when the wind and the waves beat against that rock, or beat against that house, it will stand firm because it's founded on the rock, as opposed to the fool who ignores him and ends up building his house on sand. And when the foundation of sand gives way, then the whole house crumbles. That said, when it comes to practical things, it's not like Jesus is standing there talking to you, explaining this stuff to you. We have to admit that practically, the reason why we know about Jesus is because Jesus is found in the pages of the Bible. And that's what I'm trying to draw here, is a Bible with some papers there, and we'll make that a cross there. So Jesus, so the Bible is not the foundation of our faith. Faith can exist apart from the Bible. There are many, many faithful Christians around the world who do not have the Bible in their own language and cannot read it, but they still have saving faith because their faith is in Jesus. However, when you are dealing with apologetics, it's really helpful to be able to quote the Bible as a reliable historical source about the Word of God and the life of Jesus and the many, many other things. Yes, you can technically believe in Jesus without the Bible, and many Christians who deny the truth of the Bible, they still have a shot at eternal life because Jesus saves you even if you don't believe in the Bible. But the fact of the matter is the Bible is the inerrant, inspired Word of God, and it is the only rule and norm for Christian faith and living. So when people attack the veracity of the Bible, when they say, oh, the Bible was just written by a bunch of ancient, Jewish guys who had their own agenda, and they were wrong about everything, and there's contradictions in it, and we don't even know what the original words were, and stuff like that. It really kind of attacks this foundation that our faith is built on. And of course, Jesus won't crumble, but you might feel like he's crumbling, and perhaps I should maybe say the bottom level of your faith might begin to crumble if you believe this stuff. And so a very, very important question that we need to answer as Christians is the one at the top of page 45 in your workbook. How do we know the Bible is true? We might spend 2 weeks on this topic because it's very important. Before we get underway, I want to cite my own sources. A lot of what I know about the veracity of the Bible comes from a fellow named Josh McDowell, who, like 25 years ago, published this book called New Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And in this book, Josh McDowell says very little of himself. But instead, what it is it is a collection of scholarly authorities talking about the Word of God. They're not always Christian authorities, but they are always authorities in the field in which he quotes them. And this is a marvelous, if a little bit dense, collection of well-regarded scholarly work that gives evidence that demands a verdict, namely evidence that demonstrates the truth of the Bible. Not because the Bible claims to be true, but because the Bible is, the evidence demands you to conclude the Bible is a very special book. And it kind of invites you to ask why, how, what makes this book so special. So a lot of what I am going to be saying to you that is not found in your workbook comes from this book, which is edited and compiled by Josh McDowell, but like I said, the substance of the book comes from all over the place. You will be reading a little bit from the book for your homework tonight. I do admit that some of the language is a little bit scholarly and difficult, so have a dictionary handy. It's not a very long article, it's just a couple of excerpts. The questions that I ask are going to have some big words in them, but the big words are actually there to help you, because if you simply cross-reference the big word in the question to where it appears in the article, you will find the answer to the question attached to it. So don't be scared by the assignment. I think it's very doable. It will just, you might need to read it through it twice or something like that, but it's not too much reading, so it'll be good. Okay, so before we talk about the evidence that the Bible is true, we need to get on the same level, the same page as to what the Bible actually is. Of course, the Bible that we have is not the Bible as it actually is. This is a translation of the Bible into English. Who can tell me what languages the Bible was written in originally? Addison, you look very uncomfortable. Hebrew is the language of the Old Testament, yes. Elliot?
And then Greek, right?
Greek is the language of the New Testament, yes. If you want to get technical, some of the later books of the Old Testament are written in Aramaic, but that's basically Hebrew. It's the same alphabet and very similar vocabulary, but technically a different language, so, you know, the nitpickers on the internet who are looking this stuff up on Wikipedia while I rattle it off from memory, they're gonna point that out. But anyway, yes, Hebrew for the Old Testament and Greek for the New. It's also worth noting there is a very special Greek translation of the Old Testament that was done in, I don't remember the year, but it was centuries before Christ. Basically, the Greek Empire was expanding, and they were forcing everybody they conquered to become Greek. They were trying to eradicate all non-Greek culture from the empire, and that included language. And so a new generation of Hebrew children were growing up not learning how to read the sacred writings of the Bible. And so a group of 70 Hebrew scholars got together in Egypt, I believe, and they did a great deal of work to translate the Bible from the original Hebrew into Greek, which that's good for us because we understand Greek, at least our modern scholars understand Greek a lot better than they understand Hebrew. And so, and that translation is called the Septuagint because Septui somehow means 70, and it refers to the 70 Jewish scholars who translated it into Greek. Not a perfect translation, but an excellent one, and one that is still often quoted with authority, especially in places where we're not quite sure what the Hebrew maybe means. But we also know Hebrew very well, in large part thanks to a thriving Jewish community in the world that exists and still reads it, because the Greeks, it turns out, were not successful in completely eradicating all non-Greek culture from the empire. But they tried, and for a while, at least 70 scholars were worried they might succeed. Okay. So that said, the Bible is not in this nice English translation. It also did not exist in this nicely bound volume. In its original writing, books did not even exist. They had things that were similar to books, Like not spiral bound paper, but sheets of paper that were bound together. Scrolls is a very important one, yes. But even the scrolls were made of a material that was not paper. And so page 45, we're going to look at some of the materials on which the Bible was originally written. This is important because this unit deals with what are called manuscripts. You're going to encounter that word a lot in your homework, so we're going to define it here. A manuscript.
Oh, we learned that in English class.
Oh yeah?
Oh yeah.
Comes from the Latin manu, meaning hand,
Yep, we learned that. Remember that,
and
guys?
script meaning writing.
Yeah.
We had to learn mom.
I'm just going to put write.
Oh.
So a manuscript is a document that was written by hand. Specifically, and I'm going to define it this way intentionally. In fact, let me pull out the homework because I'm pretty proud of the definition I came up with. It is the physical object on which something is written. So, when we refer to the original text of the Bible, we're talking about the words. But when we refer to the original manuscript of the Bible, we are referring to an actual physical object, something like a piece of paper, but not always a piece of paper, but some actual physical object on which the words of the Bible are written. And obviously, even today, we can't fit the whole Bible on a paper unless you do one of those stupid micro-engraving novelty things. So also, in ancient times, the entire Bible would not fit on a single piece of whatever they're writing on, a single manuscript. So also keep that in mind, is when we talk about a manuscript, we are never talking about the whole New Testament or the whole Old Testament. You might say a collection of manuscripts, and you might even refer to that collection as a manuscript, but that's maybe not technically true. But we'll get to that. Early documents were not written on paper. I'm just reading now, page 45. In fact, paper wasn't invented until about 100 BC in China during the Han Dynasty. Sai Lun, a government official, discovered that mixing mulberry bark and hemp rags with water and then drying the mixture in the sun produced a form of paper. And we will never talk about that again. Before the invention of paper, written documents took different forms. Match the writing surfaces to the descriptions below. So let's see how well you guys know your ancient manuscript surfaces. What's that?
I think I can.
Okay,
I
so
150.
the first one, characters made with a reed on clay or wax tablet were first used in Sumeria and Mesopotamia as early as 3500 BC. What were those tablets made of? Not vellum, which is what I think you're trying to say.
Cuneiform?
Cuneiform, very good.
Dang it.
I should have looked up how to pronounce that, but we'll go with Elliot's pronunciation. Cuneiform. So cuneiform is basically a clay tablet with writing on it. We are not including stone on this because nobody actually wrote on stone. If anybody was carving something into stone, it was a huge project. You had a hammer and chisel, and you would spend, half an hour or more on a single letter. So people did not actually communicate with each other on stone. But we like when things are written in stone because they survive. The problem with cuneiform tablets and all this other stuff is they don't survive very often. These clay tablets are known to break. The other things are known to rot and stuff like that. And even when they don't break or rot, oftentimes the ink goes bad because, you've seen the ink fade on a receipt that you leave in your pocket for too long. Imagine what it does on a piece of papyrus or something. The second one is a paper-like material made in ancient Egypt from flattened reed stems laid at right angles and pounded flat. Addison?
Papyrus.
Papyrus. Very good. Your heart's in the right place, yes. Papyrus. So, you do ever do those woven mats out of construction paper in like preschool where you get long strips of paper and you weave them and make a placemat?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's papyrus, except they used a hammer and probably some water to pound it flat. And you end up with a flat surface made out of grass and is able to be written on. But of course it's made out of grass, so like, you know, not exactly gonna last millennia usually. How about this one? It is a thin layer of untanned sheep or goat skin used as a writing surface, named after the city of Pergamon in ancient Greece, which specialized in its production. Braden?
Wait, parchment.
Parchment, very good. Yeah, it starts with a
I know that
P.
one.
Starts with a P like Pergamum, and it's not papyrus. Yeah, so parchment is animal skin, which is better, but yeah, still not perfect. But last one then, Addison, go ahead. Vellum, very good. Vellum is thin calf skin and is considered the highest quality writing surface. Its Latin name is vitulinum, which means made from calf. So there you go. Yeah, so those are the 4 basic writing materials on which ancient manuscripts tend to be found. Or of which ancient manuscripts tend to be made, because of course the manuscript is the object and is not the writing on the object, although, you know, that's kind of part of the definition too. Major manuscripts. So now that we know how this stuff happens, there's a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. So in general, when you have a timeline, there are 3 major things that you're worried about. Here we are now, and we are trying to figure out what happened. Stuff happened. Okay. So stuff happened way back then, and we are in the now, and we want to know what is the stuff. Come on, what is the stuff that happened? So 2 things happen that are especially important in this discussion. First of all, stuff gets written down. Yeah, so we'll put that there. So sometime after the stuff happened, somebody wrote about it, right? And this gap here is important. Because suppose some stuff happened to my great-great-grandpappy when he was on a boat coming over from old country to America. And he kind of talked about it a bit with his son, my great-grandpappy, and he kind of talked about his son, and you know, it was all kind of like, whatever. And then I was like, hey, somebody should write this down. So there could be like 200 years between when stuff happens and when stuff even gets written down first. After that, because most of human history, we did not have reliable ways to copy information. We had to copy stuff. So copy, and then why can't they just keep using the original thing to make more copies?
Because
it's already used.
But it's not. I mean, it's reading. We have the used book market is thriving because you can read things more than once.
you can.
You can, yeah, you can.
That's
read
a
it.
important topic.
It's not like a video game item where it gets consumed when you use it, like a key in a Zelda game or something. You can keep reading it over and over again, but they still need to make copies every now and then. And why do they have to do that?
Because the other one goes old.
The other one goes old and it decays and rots or gets lost or it gets burned up in a fire or whatever, right?
It's gonna rot.
Why
Huh?
don't they, if they know it's gonna rot, why don't they write it like before it rots? Like when it starts rotting.
Or why don't you write it in stone?
Writing in stone is expensive and time consuming.
Well,
That's
Well,
why
they
we
don't
don't
want
do
to
that.
have to keep reusing it or reusing
Why
it.
don't-
Reusing it.
Yeah, but we're not, I mean, this is just stuff. I'm not talking about the Bible yet. I'm just talking about stuff, right? So my great-great-grandpappy coming over on a boat, he didn't think anybody cared because he was just a poor Danish guy coming over on a boat to a new country. It was kind of exciting for him, but like, it's not like he's writing the annals of American history or something. He just has a story of some stuff that happened. So, yeah, and then when I write the stuff down, you know, some people in my family might care about it. Some other people in my family be like, I knew your great-great-grandpappy, he had a tendency to exaggerate the truth, so I wouldn't put much stock in that thing. So whatever the reason, they have to continue making copies of copies because the previous thing gets destroyed, and so on. And eventually, sometime in the future, I'm going to keep doing more and more copies. Copy, you get it. However, sometime in the future, somebody finds, and it doesn't really matter when, we're going to go with now. Now, somebody finds a copy, right? And let's pretend like this copy was this one right here, right? So the process of copying is ongoing because they don't know that some guy in the future is going to find this one. But as it happens, some guy in the future finds this copy. And this gap then becomes important. From the time the stuff was written down to the time that the earliest copy is found. Elliot?
Wouldn't the copies of a copy over time be more exaggerated because they're copying something else and it could be differently told?
Yes. Suppose right here on this copy an error gets introduced. The fish was actually 12 inches long, but the dude wrote 12 feet instead. And so now suddenly great-great-grandpappy's fish is gigantic. Yeah. And then every copy from that point forward is going to contain that error because they don't have the original to check it against. And, a 12-foot long fish isn't completely unbelievable, right, great-great-grandpappy? So, so this is why I'm writing all these copies, because every time the copy gets made, it creates an opportunity for an error to be introduced.
So it's like telephone.
Yeah, it's like a game of telephone, exactly, across time. So yeah, this copy maybe has one error, and then this copy introduces 2 more errors, which means this one has 3 errors. And then if this one introduces 2 more errors, now we have 5 errors. And so when you get way over here, you've got several hundred errors or more. Elliot?
Can we play a game of telephone if time allows?
Time won't allow. It's already
Play
6:30.
telephone. What about next week then?
We'll see. Anyway, so somebody now finds a copy, and this becomes our earliest known manuscript. I'm gonna write that down there. Earliest. I'm just gonna do a different color. It's black and not working for me today. Green, not blue. Blue's been pretty good today.
Oh.
Come on.
Green feels not love.
Earliest manuscript. This is what we call this. Earliest manuscript right there. And that is because this is the copy that somebody in the future found. So here we can write stuff gets forgotten. Happens in this gap. Stuff gets forgotten. Right? I mean, something happened and you don't write about it for 100 years. Or rather your great-great-grandkid writes about it. There's going to be some information lost in this gap here. And similarly in this gap here, I'm just going to write copy errors. Propagate is a good verb. To propagate means to kind of spread outward and get bigger. So you have 1 error here, but it becomes 3 errors in the next copy, and 10 errors in the next copy, and out and out and out it goes. So, what would we expect? What would we expect to find in this earliest manuscript? In our quest to learn the stuff that happened, what are we going to find in this earliest manuscript? Elliot?
A 12-foot fish.
A 12-foot fish, right? So we're going to find some mistakes due to these 2 sources. Either we have copyist errors, where people just write down the wrong information, or we have an unreliable original author who forgot something, or intentionally omitted something. I mean, we're assuming that everybody involved in this process is honest, but that's not a fair assumption. So needless to say, when scholars are studying ancient literature, they often have no idea how close they are to what actually happened. If you have 20 ancient copies, there is a very good chance that there are going to be huge differences between them. One of the best attested ancient writings that we have is a story called the Iliad by a man named Homer. Have you guys heard of Homer's The Iliad?
Not like Homer Simpson, right?
No.
No,
Yeah.
yeah, I've heard of Homer.
Okay, yeah. Homer was an ancient Greek author, wrote the
Odyssey
Iliad.
too, right?
Was that?
He wrote the Odyssey.
And the Odyssey, yes. Yeah, that's the sequel to the Iliad. And anyway, Homer's The Iliad is the second best attested work of ancient literature. And it has, I'm checking the data in your homework here, there are 643 copies that we know of ancient manuscripts of Homer's The Iliad. And I've only done a little bit of research on the Iliad, but I know enough to know that there are entire chapters of this story that are absent from certain copies. And that makes you wonder, did Homer write that chapter and some people forgot to include it? Or did somebody else write that chapter and other people were like, hey, Homer must have written this, it's pretty good. And you can't really know. Homer's The Iliad is an important, it's a work of fiction, but it's historical fiction. And a lot of the battles and nations and things like that that occur in this fiction are believed to be real by historians. So, do you guys know the story of the Trojan horse?
Yep.
Yeah.
Where the soldiers of Sparta made a wooden horse and hid inside of it and got in the city of Troy. That's from the Iliad, and we have no other evidence of the Trojan horse.
Wait, so that could be fake?
That could be fake. Yeah. Yeah, because that's I believe the Iliad is the only source we have for the Trojan horse.
I believe so.
Now, I mentioned 643 copies of the Iliad, and if that sounds like a lot, it is. Every other ancient document on this page, let me see here, we have about 200 copies of Demosthenes' work, whatever that is. There's 20 copies of Tacitus, 19 copies of Livy, then we get to 10 copies of Caesar's Gallic Wars, and then we're down to 8 copies, 8, 7, 7. So we have we're in the single digits for copies of some of these ancient Greek writings that we rely upon for history and stuff.
Is Caesar just like Julius Caesar?
Yeah. Yep, Julius Caesar wrote Gallic Wars. Okay, so I have not revealed the kicker though. We're going to keep on reading here and I'll reveal the kicker when the time is right. So we're on page 46 here. Major manuscripts. How do the earliest copies of the Bible compare with other ancient writings? How can we trust the Bible writers? First bullet point, when the Masoretes copied biblical texts, they wrote only one line at a time. Then they counted the letters and spaces. If there was an error, the copy was destroyed. Who the crap are the Masoretes? The Masoretes are a group of Jews who I believe lived near Russia in about 1000 AD, who were extremely dedicated to the preservation of the Old Testament. That was their jam. That was what they did. And they had been doing it for centuries before they were discovered by European Christians. And the text of Scripture that we have from them, preserved from about 1000 AD, maybe it's 900, I forget. It's quite a bit of time after Christ, is called the Masoretic text. It's often abbreviated MT. It will not be mentioned in your homework tonight, but if you ever hear about the Masoretic text, that is the earliest full copy of the entire Old Testament that we have. The earliest Old Testament manuscript collection is the Masoretic text. It's preserved in a museum somewhere, you can go see it, all that great stuff. And so the Masoretes, I'm taking this with me, if you're looking on page 46, the Masoretes had a system to minimize these copy errors. And their system was very painstaking. They would copy, when the Masorete made a copy, he would copy one line of text. Just like that, one line. And then they would stop the copying, and he would count all of the letters and spaces in that one line. And if there was an error, then the whole copy would be destroyed.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, I know. This is oh my gosh stuff. The more you read about the Masoretes, the more you were like, holy crap.
They were crazy.
They were dedicated, yes. And it took a very long time. And yeah, that's why I say this was their jam. You could not have an entire society centered around preserving the scriptures this thoroughly. And this was like a sect of Jewish monks, practically. that this was their thing. They preserved the Jewish text. The Masoretes were also very kind to the Christians who wanted to learn the Old Testament. What the Masoretes did was they held the text to be so sacred that they would not change or add or anything to any of the characters in the text. But Hebrew doesn't have vowels. So the only way to really read Hebrew, you have to know what the words, you have to know the language because there's no vowels. Imagine if I wrote something like R-L-L-Y, Y is a vowel. W-N-T-T-H-N-G. What do you think that says? I kind of messed it up by writing it all.
Really?
I think that's.
It's supposed to say, I really want to say something.
Oh.
Wait, where's the I?
It's a
There's
vowel.
no vowel.
Oh.
Oh,
Wait, is it supposed to say
Oh, it's a
something right
vowel
now?
also. I really want to say something.
I get it now.
I'm counting Y as a vowel unless it makes a Y sound.
To say something.
Play
Oh, I forgot an M.
Wait, do another one, do another
There's a
one.
copy of there. I really want to say something.
Burn it.
Really want to
Burn it! Yes, that is what the Masoretes would do. Burn it. You can't just erase it. No,
You should do
no
another one.
stray marks or anything. No, we're pressing time here, so I'm gonna keep going. Anyway, so Hebrew is designed to be written without vowels, so it fares a little bit better than English, but generally you can kind of see if you did not speak English, you would not have a clue what that is even trying to say.
Well, actually.
So what the Masoretes would do to help the Christians out, they actually added vowels to the text, not by changing the characters, but by doing what's called pointing, where they would put little marks underneath the letters to show what vowels belong after that letter. So it would look something like this. Oops, that's wrong too.
Burn it.
Yep. So something like this. And then I don't know. They would have a character here with the I underneath it, but there were no Hebrew words that began with a vowel.
I forget why is a vowel.
Yeah. So yeah, I really want to say something, and it's weird, but you can make it work, and that's what the Masoretes did. But yeah, the Old Testament is usually based on the Masoretic text, like your English Old Testament. They translate the Masoretic text from Hebrew into English. They use the Greek Septuagint translation to help them out sometimes, but the Old Testament in English is based on the Masoretic text. And then, if there are any other texts of the Old Testament available, which there are some, in recent times they've been finding more, then they might include a note that, some translations use this word instead of that word, or something of that nature. But by and large, the Masoretic text is the Hebrew Old Testament. Okay, so that said though, with the Masoretic text, let's figure this out here. So Masoretic text, I'm just going to put MT. We're going to do this timeline specific for the Masoretic text. So if the earliest copy comes from 1000 AD, then what is this gap? What is the gap between now and the earliest manuscripts?
6,000 years.
No, 1000 AD. The earliest manuscript that we have was written in 1000 AD, roughly. So what is the gap between now and 1000 AD?
3,000 years.
Well, no.
3,000.
1024 years.
Yeah.
Oh, AD, not BC.
That's
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Oh.
Also,
Yeah.
I keep saying 1000 AD, but I want to note that I could be wrong. If you look up Masoretic text on Wikipedia, you can believe whatever number they give for the earliest manuscript. I just remember it was around 1000. It might have been, I think it was like 700, but then the 1000 comes next. Okay, so we're going to call this, for the Masoretic text, we're going to call this about 1000 years. Make the math easier, right? There's all of these copies of the original manuscript. So the original Old Testament, of course, let's see. We're going to look specifically. This is Masoretic text. Okay. We're not going to be able to look at this gap with the Masoretic text because we really don't know the gap between when stuff happened and when stuff was written down. We believe the Torah was written by Moses, which means that the events of the Torah, at least from Exodus to Deuteronomy, were basically being written down almost as they happened, a decade tops, probably less than that, if Moses was writing this stuff down. Of course, Genesis all happened before Moses, and Genesis covers several thousand years of history, so we can't very well properly define this gap for Genesis. But by and large, we believe that there is not much time passed between when stuff happened in the Old Testament era and when it was written down, because the Jewish people were very scholarly and they really cared about their history and their people, and that's just part of Jewish tradition. God tells the Jews in Deuteronomy to write down, or to bind their words to their fists and hang them down as frontlets on their foreheads. So like you imagine God's asking the Jews to walk around with a ball cap on with a Bible verse hanging from it, and write it on your doorposts and your bed, just everywhere in your house you should have my word written down. So the Jews were extremely intellectual. They were very literate. They taught their children to read, which nowadays is the standard, but in ancient times it absolutely was not. But it was that important that they be able to pass on the faith to the next generation. So they taught their kids to read and write, and they made sure that everything worth writing was written. So the gap between when stuff happened and stuff was written down for the Old Testament is likely very small. But what I want to compare this to is another archaeological find that is called the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm pretty sure I've talked about these with you guys before, or maybe you heard me mention it in a sermon, because this is a very cool find. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain the book of Isaiah as well as a few other books, but it has the entirety of the prophet Isaiah is contained within the Dead Sea Scrolls. They have this name because they were found in the Dead Sea, or in a cave near the Dead Sea, not in the Dead Sea. They were found in a cave near the Dead Sea sometime in the 1940s, I think. So this is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. But the Dead Sea Scrolls are dated by archaeologists to have taken place way before Christ.
What?
We're going to go here. So we'll call this, I think it was about 700 BC, is that right? No, 300 BC. Yeah, I think it was about 300 BC. And I think maybe the 1,000 years is between this and this. So that means that the prophet Isaiah had written something 300 years before Christ. I always think this is awesome because the prophet Isaiah is the #1 most quoted book in the New Testament regarding prophecies about Jesus. And the #1 thing that critics would say about prophecies about Jesus is they were written after the fact, right? So the Christians, they wanted people to think that Jesus was the fulfillment of prophecy. So what do? Well, you edit the older books to make it look like they prophesy about Jesus. And the original books get lost to time, and the edited versions become the original one. But now we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are written before Christ.
Bow.
And, well, hold on, the bow hasn't come yet. Because you can compare what's written on the Dead Sea Scrolls to what's written in the Masoretic text. So we're gonna update this here. So I'm pretty sure this is something like 700 AD.
So it's 1,300 years.
Yeah, so 1,300 years. It actually doesn't matter this gap here. I maybe started this off wrong. Nobody cares about this gap here. Well, somebody cares. Whoever determines this date cares very much.
Yeah.
But we'll trust the archaeologists on this one. So our earliest manuscript of the Masoretic text is from 700 AD. And now suddenly we have this book from 1,000 years earlier. So that is 1,000 years of copy errors.
Oh.
That's
Yeah.
a lot of errors.
1,000 years of copy errors. 1,000 years of copies of copies of copies of the book of Isaiah. And you know, we know from other ancient documents that copy errors, you know, they compound, they go crazy, they propagate. And so you would expect there to be almost no resemblance between the book of Isaiah and the Dead Sea Scrolls and the book of Isaiah and the Masoretic text. It's not zero, but the Dead Sea Scroll of Isaiah dates to 100 BC. Maybe I should just read my book. 100 BC. Sorry. Still before Christ. That's important. Dates to 100 BC and is 95% identical in a word-for-word comparison with other manuscripts. And like I said, there's about 1,000 years, so that would make this 900 AD. I know 1,000 years is pretty close. There's about 1,000-year difference between what used to be the oldest manuscript of Isaiah and what was in the Dead Sea Scrolls. About 1,000-year difference there, and only about 5% of a letter-by-letter or word-by-word comparison is lost, and the few discrepancies are minor. I like to give as an example in the New Testament. You might have one manuscript that says Jesus, one manuscript that says Christ, one that says Jesus Christ, and one that says He. And, you know, on paper, that looks like there are 4 different versions of the text. But in reality, everybody knows what he's talking about. It's Jesus. Elliot.
So on the board there it says the earliest manuscript is at 900 AD, but we have a manuscript from 100 BC. How would that be the earliest manuscript?
Well, you notice I wrote that in blue. So I actually just wrote earliest manuscript as our general case of an archaeological find where somebody finds a copy of some stuff that happened, and it happens to be this copy. And so this copy then becomes known as the earliest manuscript. And this was the earliest manuscript of Isaiah until the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the 1940s. Yeah?
Well, you like point that back to somebody finds a copy, but 1940s is when we found the 100 BC manuscript. So wouldn't that still be the earliest manuscript?
What?
Somebody, come on, don't fail me now. Somebody else finds a different copy.
Thank you.
There. Happy?
Very.
Does that make it more clear? I try not to draw too many lines because it starts to look like a football play.
Yeah.
But in any
wrong,
case,
I
yeah.
understand it.
So if you were paying attention as the picture was drawn, that's one of the reasons why I draw on a board rather than making PowerPoint slides. It's very good. It looks just like you, Tyson. One of the reasons I prefer to draw on the board instead of using PowerPoint slides is that watching me draw it helps you understand the hodgepodge that unfolds. So just as a review, nowadays the earliest copy, before the 1940s, the earliest known copy of Isaiah was from about 900 AD, and it was part of the Masoretic text, which was preserved by the Masoretes. And they had a very good system for copying, but no system is perfect. But how perfect is it? We don't know. Until the 1940s, when somebody else finds a different copy of Isaiah that dates back to 100 BC, and when this copy is compared to this one from 1,000 years later, they are found to be nearly identical, and the differences don't matter. There's nothing significant in those little differences. Brayden.
Wouldn't you think you would be like very proud if you found like a really old manuscript?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I think it was found by like just some kid playing in a cave. He found the jars, and then he told somebody who told somebody, and eventually the British or someone got involved, and they were like, "Holy crap! This is an archaeological find, huh?"
Like a kid actually found them.
I think so. Yeah. A kid found like one jar in a cave in near the Dead Sea, and then somebody who cared a little more went into the cave and found a whole bunch of jars. and they knew well enough to take very good care of the jars and their contents. It actually took, I believe, 5 years for them to open the scroll of what's called 1Q Isaiah A. Q for Qumran, which is the
Wait,
name
why
of the
did it take
region.
them 5 years to open it?
Because it was extremely fragile, yeah, and so they had to open it very, very, very slowly.
Dinosaurs.
5 years.
We actually have found more ancient manuscripts that we can't open because they have been turned into charcoal, which is just one of many wonderful things that can happen. But we are now able to use X-ray technology to read some of those manuscripts without opening them. And so we've actually, we continue to this day, we continue to add more ancient manuscripts to our collection of ancient manuscripts about the Bible. And we never find any differences worth mentioning. I mean, I can't say we never find any differences because one manuscript says Jesus and one says Christ, but the differences don't matter. Elliot,
Are those manuscripts dated before 100 BC?
I don't know.
He doesn't know.
Stop hitting the table. You're scaring the dinner people out there.
Yeah.
Okay, third bullet point. Here's the kicker that I mentioned earlier. So remember how I said there's 643 copies of Homer's The Iliad? There are 24,000 early copies of the New Testament.
That's a
And
lot.
depending on how you define early, the number can change. The thing you'll be reading for homework tonight mentions 5,366, but it was written in 1999, so that's 25 years old. Which the number always goes up. We don't lose ancient manuscripts anymore. We find them, we take a picture, and we digitize it, and then who cares? So yeah, somebody cares, but we don't. So yeah, the number of ancient manuscripts will never fall unless, like, computers die or something. So in 1999 there were 5,366 copies of the New Testament, ancient copies of the New Testament, according to Josh McDowell's source, which is I forget where it comes from, but it's mentioned in the text if you actually read the homework assignment. So yeah. So, and we know there's all of these discrepancies in the Iliad, and we have 643 copies of it, which is huge, but it is nothing compared to how many copies of the New Testament we have. It is unreal. And these copies agree almost perfectly. And like I said, the disagreements don't matter. Furthermore, with the little time we have left here, fourth bullet point, the time between the completion of the New Testament and the earliest known copy is 225 years. I'm just going to do a new timeline. Okay, this is going to be specific to the New Testament. Gotta write fast. New Testament, I'm going to put that in blue. New Testament. New Test. There we go. Okay, so the New Testament is about Jesus. So we're going to put, as the stuff that happens, we're going to put Jesus. So here's a cross. This is what the New Testament is actually about. And remember, there's two major gaps you want to worry about. The gap between when it happened and when it was written down, and the gap between when it was written down and when the earliest manuscript comes from. So, fourth bullet point. Fourth bullet point deals with the second gap I mentioned. So, let me see. Written down and earliest manuscript. Earliest. I'm going to abbreviate manuscript as MS because your homework does that a lot. So note that. I wrote a note in your homework worksheet, but I know you guys like skipping the directions. So when you read the articles, you will encounter the letters MS. That stands for manuscript. Yes, sometimes you will find MSS. That means manuscripts, plural. I don't know why they make it like
Manuscripts.
Yeah, manuscripts.
Oh, I thought
So-
there was any manuscripts.
Nope, just manuscripts, plural. It's plural. I don't know why they do that, don't ask. So
Yeah, why did
anyway,
you put like
fourth bullet point deals with the time between the completion of the New Testament, that is when it was written down, and the earliest manuscript. And this gap here is, it's actually a lot less than this. I don't know where they're getting this number. But I think they're calling this the full New Testament. So the earliest complete copy of the New Testament, in fact, I'm going to write that down there. Earliest manuscript complete. is 225 years after it was written down. The earliest fragment, according to the article in your homework, the earliest fragment of the New Testament is from about 160 AD. It comes from the Gospel of John, which is traditionally believed to have been written around 99 AD or 100 AD to make the math easier. So this gap shrinks if you don't just say a full collection of the New Testament, but instead you look for the earliest fragments. This number shrinks down to about 60, which is incredibly small. By comparison, this number for Homer's The Iliad is about 400 years. Right? Yeah, it's about 400 years. And then the Iliad is like the best, but even the Iliad stands head and shoulders above everything else. Look at the fifth bullet point on page 46. The earliest known manuscripts of Oedipus the King, or Oedipus Rex, written by Sophocles, were written more than 1,400 years after his death. Presumably, Sophocles did not write the play on his deathbed, but we know he didn't write it after he died. So the date of his death, from the date of Sophocles' death, which is the latest possible date it could have been written down, to the earliest manuscripts for Oedipus Rex is 1,400 years. And that is a lot more typical of ancient literature. It's unusual to have literature even 500 years between when it was written down and when the earliest manuscript was written. So, yeah, crazy. And then the last one there, this goes back to the Old Testament. I don't really like how the book plays fast and loose between the New Testament and the Old Testament because they are very different archaeologically, but we'll play along. The Cyrus cylinder, which is a clay barrel covered with ancient writing, created in 539 BC. So they're quoting that one because that's like way before Christ. You know, the Dead Sea Scrolls are only 100 years before Christ. But 539 BC, that's like while the events of the Old Testament were actually happening. And on this Cyrus cylinder, it was unearthed in 1879, the cylinder verifies both Isaiah's prophecy naming Cyrus and the events in 2 Chronicles concerning the resettlement of Jerusalem following the exile. So, at the very least, the Cyrus cylinder is what I call extra-biblical verification. That means it's from outside of the Bible, that's extra biblical, and yet it says the same thing that the Bible says about some historic event. And there's quite a few of these ancient things get found, and we read them and we're like, oh hey, it says what the Bible says. So I guess we can believe the Bible there. And it's amazing how many critics continue to exist when that sort of evidence is present, yeah. Okay, we're going to stop there for today. That's actually most of what I wanted to say about the authority of the Bible. It's really, really powerful stuff. And I want you to read it, so I'm going to have you do this homework assignment here.
Do you like self-portrait?
Yeah. So I actually made photocopies of the book New Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell, and I used my magical Photoshop skills to arrange the portions of the text so that they would all fit on one page.
Is this online at all?
It is not online. Well, I haven't looked. This is a 25-year-old book, and it's evangelistic in nature, so you might be able to find the full text of this book online.
Oh, okay.
But in case it isn't, the assignment itself is going to be online.
That ain't.
So like that thing that you're looking at there
Yeah.
will be on the church website.